Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session in our Workplace Relations 101 for Frontline Managers series. My name is Manasa Visakai, and I will be your host for today. Before we dive into today's session, I would like to take a moment to introduce IHR Australia. At IHR Australia, we work with organizations across the country to manage what we refer to as human risk, the people related challenges that can affect performance, culture, and compliance. We've been working with clients to support them for over 25 years, partnering with business leaders, HR teams, and boards to support both proactive planning and interventions to support issues. What sets us apart is our ability to balance legal considerations with a human centered, pragmatic approach. Let's take a look at our four core service areas. First, we have the HR consulting wing. We help organizations design strong people strategies, solve workforce challenges, and build cultures where performance and accountability thrive. Second, we have our compliance and risk advisory services. This includes psychosocial risk assessments, wage compliance reviews, and broader governance support, helping organizations meet their legal obligations and embed best practices. Third, we have our workplace investigations and mediation services. When issues arise, we provide fair, defensible investigations and expert mediation to help you resolve conflict and rebuild trust. And finally, our workplace training programs. We deliver scenario based, practical training to equip your leaders and teams with the tools to manage risk, lead well, and foster a respectful workplace. So, whether you're managing a current issue or strengthening existing practices, our core expertise is in managing people risk. Well, once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. In today's webinar, this is our newest series for 2025, Workplace Relations 101 for Frontline Managers, and we are exploring the topic avoiding discrimination and other legal claims and how to respond effectively. Joining me today are two of my favorite experts, and they're also leading industry specialists. Kirsten Hartman, Director of Workplace Advisory and Compliance, and Bronwyn Dennis, our Senior Facilitator and Consultant. Hello, Kirsten. Hello, Bronwyn.
Hello.
How are you guys doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
That's wonderful.
Yes,
so we have
well, I just committed the cardinal sin of training and I was on mute while I was speaking. So we've got that out of the way for the session. Morning, Manasa. Morning, Kirsten.
Lovely to see you guys again. Kirsten, you're based in Queensland, and Bronwyn, you're in Sydney. Let's start off by just introducing yourselves and what you do here at IHR Australia.
Okay, I'll make a start. My name's Kirsten Hartman, and I am the Director of Workplace Advisory and Compliance. So I work around and manage all of the workplace relations advice, complex consultancy and compliance and investigations. So anything that has a nexus to an outcome or a legal outcome or for people, or the management of risk around people, or terms and conditions of employment, for example, that's what myself and my team work on. Bronwyn?
Thanks, Kirsten. Yes, my name's Bronwyn Dennis. I've been working for IHR for coming up to 2 years now, principally working in the facilitation space, running those training programs to equip those managers and employees with both the leadership skills and that understanding of those acceptable workplace behaviours, and also just starting to dip my toe a little bit into the HR consulting space. So enjoying the opportunity to look into that space.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Kirsten and Bronwyn. Should we get right into our topic today? So
Yes.
before I pose my first question, just a little bit of insight into what we will cover in today's session. We'll start off by looking at what are some legal claims employers can find themselves in and how commonly does it arise. Then we move on to how poor handling of incidents can lead to a legal claim. We've included some great case studies, which Kirsten will be exploring later. Then we'll look at some of the steps we can take when an issue arises, like early intervention, documentation, and escalation strategies that organizations can implement. Then Bronwyn will come in with her tips around how to build a fair and respectful culture. We do encourage all participants today to submit your questions in the Q&A box. I'll be closely monitoring them. We've already got a couple of questions from audiences who have submitted them in our registration form, so I'll be prioritizing those. But I will keep an eye out for any interesting questions, and our experts will be answering them later in the session today. So, Bronwyn, I'm going to start off with you. So we're exploring what can go wrong, right? And we're looking at avoiding discrimination and legal claims. But I think for employers, this webinar has been designed for frontline managers. What do you think are some legal claims that they can find themselves in, and how commonly does it arise?
Yeah. So Kirsten will go through a few of the case studies today, and she's far more the expert in this space than I am. But just generally speaking, Australian workers are protected by a range of laws that are designed to prevent them experiencing what we would call adverse treatment in the workplace. So this includes things like being unfairly dismissed, being discriminated against, or treated poorly for, exercising their rights to do things like take sick leave, raise a safety concern or join a union. So if an employee believes that they've experienced, as I say, what we call adverse action for these reasons, they might bring a general protections claim through the Fair Work Commission. And that commission would also cover their rights about unfair dismissal as well. But employees are also covered by a whole suite of other legislation around discrimination, what we call protected attributes. Employees shouldn't be discriminated against on the basis of a whole range of protected attributes in Australia, and that includes things like race, sex, disability, age, marital status, pregnancy, whole range of areas. And they can make a claim if an employee feels that they have been discriminated against on the grounds of one of those protected attributes. They can make a claim through the Australian Human Rights Commission or state-based anti-discrimination boards. And sometimes when things can't be resolved through those tribunals, they might be able to submit a claim to the federal court or state-based civil and administrative tribunals. So there's quite a few avenues or pathways that employees can take if they feel that they have been treated unfairly in the workplace. And it's, good for employees to be across what that looks like. On top of that, workers are also entitled to a safe workplace. So they are protected when it comes to health and safety at work. As employers, we have a legal duty to provide a safe workplace, and that includes both physical safety and psychological safety. So if a worker does suffer an injury at work, either a physical injury or a psychological injury, whether that's due to an accident, could be due to things like bullying, the way that work has been set up, overwork, poor workplace cultures, then that employee has a right to lodge a workers' compensation claim. Now, they're generally handled through those state-based work health and safety bodies. And so failing to address these risks in the workplace, it doesn't just put staff at risk. Obviously, it can also expose organisations to legal claims, financial penalties, reputational damage, which then, impacts on their ability to attract and retain staff, and certainly can impact on their financial bottom line in terms of dealing with some of these cases.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bronwyn. Thank you for starting us off and just giving us a bit of insight into what these claims could look like in the workplace. And I think the next question would be right to bring Kirsten on to just talk about how poor handling can lead to a legal claim and how important is this skill that managers need to have when it comes to handling claims in the workplace.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go backward in order to come forward a little bit, if that's okay, if people will bear with me. The handling of a matter can be the single most important difference between whether or not you end up with a legal claim from an employee. It seems like I'm stating the obvious, but it is true. It is also true that you can do everything in inverted commas correctly and also end up with a legal claim. Purposefully, in Australia, employers have access to what we call an all-access jurisdiction. The Fair Work Commission has the specific function of resolving employment disputes, and it is an independent body with the power to carry out a range of functions relating to employment. So looping back to what Bronwyn was speaking of before. The purpose of the Fair Work Commission is for the benefit of Australia's workforce. Its functions include dispute resolution, termination of employment, and a variety of other workplace matters, also what Bronwyn mentioned before. It's an independent body and is able to operate in a similar way to a court. It can hear claims and disputes which are related to the workplace and deliver binding decisions which must be adhered to. The primary objective and responsibility of the Fair Work Commission is to assist employees and employers in maintaining fair and productive workplaces. It is set up to be easily accessible to employees, and for many in Australia, it allows dispute resolution without the heavy cost or burden of having to pay for lawyers. If an employee wants to run the dispute themselves, they can represent themselves and pay a small application fee. Now, getting back to the question, what this means for employers, however, is something very different. It means that they need to be on notice that there are very simple, for want of a better word, cheap ways for employees to embroil you in a potentially costly, time-consuming and disruptive dispute. Without too heavily going into the pros and cons of the system, it is important to note that there are many ways in which an employer can badly handle a matter and it ends up in Fair Work. The number of times a client has said to me, how did I end up here? Again, bearing in mind what I said earlier, people can do everything right and still end up there. So what we do is we try and mitigate the risk. Examples of how this happens is the following. There are poorly trained or poorly educated staff in relation to conduct and policies. There's poorly trained HR expertise. And when I say that, there are a lot of HR practitioners out there that are very, very good, but they may not have the breadth and depth of expertise that you need in your organisation. Poorly trained managers in management and dispute resolution. And what I refer to here is we have the technical manager versus the people manager. And you need both, and you need to be competent in both. Poor documentation of process, poor grievance handling procedures or a complete lack of grievance handling procedures, managers not knowing the signs or knowing what they do know and don't know. So that's people being able to put their hand up and ask for help at the right time. So not knowing when to get help. Another reason it could lead to it is ignoring a problem and hoping it will go away. You'd be amazed how many times that occurs. Oh, it's only a little thing. It's only a little thing. I don't want to make a big deal of it. Can sometimes snowball into something quite big. Not knowing about the tools available, such as investigations, being trauma-informed, principles of procedural fairness, and not using experts when they really should. Skimping on HR generally as a budget thing in terms of having the right amount of HR support for the business, for the level of people in your business. For example, not knowing when they need to trigger an independent or external review. That's a skill, knowing at what point you need to sort of tap out and get an external person to come in and help you. So all of these, or a combination of these, could end up with an employer receiving a legal claim. I speak of the Fair Work Commission. There is also the court system, which Bronwyn mentioned before, in the event that an employee does not fit into the Fair Work jurisdiction. There are also other bodies that govern workplace laws and regulations as well. Employee matters can be crippling. Management of HR matters should always be given due attention and seriousness. So a couple of examples just to sort of tie this off, is that over and over again, managers let poor performance build up. So they're allowing it to happen. They don't get help. They get increasingly frustrated until such time that it escalates. So at this time, an employee lodges a bullying claim. Sometimes somebody lodges a work cover claim, and the manager is scratching their head saying, how did I get here? The other being that the complaints are made here and there, nothing too big, hearsay, until something big actually occurs. Someone is terminated, probably with real cause in the eyes of the manager, And all of a sudden, they're receiving a SEC official email saying that they have a general protections claim and, and that someone was being terminated for a protected attribute. No file notes, no dates, no performance management. And from the outside, or from the commission perspective, it might even look right or real. But when the real reason is that there are 1,000 reasons why this person should no longer be employed. But if there's no process or there is no appropriate management of it or documentation, all the things that I've just discussed, it could end up asking the question, was this a lawful dismissal or not?
Thank you, Kirsten, for that detailed response. Before we get into the juicy bit of actually discussing a few case studies, I did want to address one question that we just got around sharing these slides. We will be sharing a recording of the webinar today and not specifically the style. So all the attendees who have registered will receive a recording of today's session. Okay, back to you, Kirsten. I know you have a bunch of case studies that you wanted to discuss today. Can we just talk through a couple of them?
Yes. So, look, I wanted to take through, and this is going to loop in, Manasa, to the steps we take when an issue arises. So there is a number of cases out there which demonstrate how things snowball into a huge case before we're sort of left thinking, oh, wow, how did we get here? So we talk about general protections. We talk about the Fair Work Act and someone. So, for example, Qantas was quite a famous one in relation to the employees had industrial action and lost their jobs. Well, that is a protected right under the Fair Work Act, and as such, that's a learning that you can't just go and terminate someone because they've exercised a workplace right. For example, another one here, which I thought was really interesting, when we talk about, termination under the Act for a casual, the act of actually reducing someone's rosters can actually end up being a termination under the Fair Work Act because you're effectively rostering them to zero, which in effect becomes a termination. Now, there might be lots of reasons why someone has done that. There might be performance management reasons, but in a lot of these cases, what they're, like I say, cases are won and lost on documentation. There's no performance management or process being placed around it. And next thing, you have an aggrieved employee and you're in the Fair Work Commission or you're in court battling it out for, unfair dismissal or general protections claim, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't go through every case because I prefer to talk about the steps that you can take when types of these issues, and these cases demonstrate how things snowball, and I'm going to take you through the steps you can take to perhaps avoid the snowball. Okay?
Yep, let's go, Kirsten.
Okay, so the steps to take when an issue does arise, and I think that's really important. It seems really obvious yet again, but early intervention is key. In reality, the real protection is, like I offered before, is ensuring the opposite occurs of what I said earlier, and it occurs before an issue arises. So, for example, what do? This is the before. We train and educate our staff in grievance management and train our staff in performance management. We ensure employees are trained in relation to bullying, harassment, discrimination, and those tailored trainings are simple, and the examples that are given are overt, so people understand their obligations. Ensure you have excellent in-house and external HR expertise available to you, and know when to tap out. Okay, know when to phone a friend, know when to get help. Train your managers in managing and dispute resolution. So when you see the little things come through, that's if you see the issue. So as we talk about when steps to take when an issue arises, jump on it straight away. Don't let it fester. Bring it to the surface. Document your processes and procedures. So even when an issue starts, if someone starts making complaints, starts agitating, make sure that you're I'm not saying everything needs to be in writing, but if you have a verbal catch up about it and, back it up with a file note, make sure that you're taking things seriously and documenting it. So if something happens in future that you can, recollection can be fuzzy, you've got it there and you've got it time and date stamped as a contemporaneous file note, which may assist you in the matter going forward. So engage in appropriate grievance. So when you've got this issue, make sure you engage in grievance handling procedures, like proper process, okay? Encourage asking for help. So leadership by example. So that's your managers and your CEOs need to encourage your frontline managers out there. Yes, I'm happy for you to, manage your team as you see fit. But the minute it goes outside and you're seeing some worrying behaviours or complaints, then get the expertise you need to manage the matter from the start. Okay, don't ignore issues. Ask, be open. Have uncomfortable conversations respectfully. So know about your key tools, such as investigations, being trauma informed. Once an issue might be in play, make sure you employ, procedural fairness. So, for example, if someone's made a complaint, and you are going to investigate it, make sure that the person who is the subject of that complaint, the respondent, has adequate information and time to respond. So you don't end up providing them some kind of procedural defence down the road. I encourage the use of experts and not seeing that as a downfall or as a budget. I think as a budget issue, shake the hand of your employee that puts their hands up for help and protects your organisation before it gets into something that's not a little issue, but a big issue. So yeah, there's just some tips and tricks around once you now just to go into just to divert from the steps to take when an issue's arising. Now I want to think back to these cases that I've got on that PowerPoint presentation, very very similar to what I've just said to you, but slightly. In the cases that I've discussed, we've talked about implementing a robust performance management system. So that's really, really, really important. And also having clear communication as well. So I've already discussed that. The other thing that the cases bring up, which I probably haven't touched on, is understanding workplace rights and obligations. So when I work with my clients or in training, I always talk about employees and employers in the framework of rights and obligations. Both the employer and the employee have rights and they both have obligations, and it's about making sure both parties are aware of them, because if they are, that's going to reduce the chance you're going to get into a case or an issue. So managers and employees must and know their rights and obligations and be overt about them. Documentation. I can't say enough. Document your meetings, decisions, discussions, and this is what the cases show in the Fair Work Commission every day. These things are won and lost on documentation. Okay, make sure you've got your discussions recorded in writing. And look, it's not just about having the record either. That whole concept of I better put that in writing to cover myself. It actually protects both parties for the record to be in writing. So saying to someone, look, we've had a discussion about these things that you're concerned about, and we came up with these ways to try and deal with the matter. That if an employee writes back, actually, no, I didn't understand it to be that. I understand it to be this. You're making sure you're actually getting to solve the problem. It's not just about having a record. It's actually about using that record to make sure that the problem is getting solved along the way. Training, I can't, one of the biggest defences at the moment around, accessorial liability claims for employers is making sure that all your staff, all your managers are adequately trained. And I'm not saying tick the box online 10-minute things. I'm talking about face-to-face, structured and overt training, which talks about all of those issues. And last of all, but not least, please seek help and not see that as a downfall. It's like if the analogy, when you've got specialists in things, you wouldn't go to, particularly an orthopedic surgeon about your heart. Do you know what I mean? We're all specialists in our field, and we can help you with those specialist nature of terms and conditions of employees' employment and any potential issues and matters that could arise in the workplace.
Thank you, Kirsten. That was a very detailed response, and I think it's time I give you a little bit of a break. And
Thank
I
you.
move, I shift my focus to Bronwyn. Bronwyn, we saw a lot of interesting cases that Kirsten talked about, and she also talked about the steps that managers can take when incidents do occur in the workplace. I guess as a leadership coach yourself, what are some ways we can build that fair and safe and respectful workplace culture? Can you take us through your recommendations for that?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. For me, and again, we all approach these things from different perspectives, and as Kirsten says, we all have different areas of expertise, and for me, it is workplace culture. And for me, culture is the key in creating those positive workplace environments, safe workplaces that are free from discrimination, harassment, and bullying. We all have a right to come to work and to be safe in that workplace. So we all contribute to that workplace culture, right? It's we all bring ourselves into that workplace. All of your employees bring themselves into that workplace. That workplace culture is at its very simplest level how we experience the workplace, the way we do things around here. And so our everyday behaviors, how we engage with each other. I talk about the language that we use in the workplace, our shared understanding of our norms. All of those sorts of things impact on workplace culture. But it's the role of our leaders, our managers, in setting and upholding those workplace expectations around behaviour that is critical. Our leaders are the ones that have the biggest impact on how workers experience that workplace culture. And so we need to make sure our managers understand their responsibility for that culture. And as leaders in an organisation, they need to make sure their managers are equipped, for those conversations and for guiding that culture. Under the Sex Discrimination Act, organisations have an obligation to eliminate sexual harassment and sexual discrimination from happening. Under the Work Health and Safety Act, organisations have a responsibility to ensure the physical and psychological safety of workers. Under the general protections of the Fair Work Act, employers are required to avoid or prevent, retaliatory or discriminatory conduct. Because of all those requirements, not just because of those, but essentially as it flows on from those requirements, it means it's no longer enough for organisations just to respond to incidents when they happen. We don't wait for an injury to happen before we look at our, safety culture in the organisation. We have systems that we've built up to protect the safety of employees that has tended to focus a little bit on the physical safety. That focus is now, shifting to make sure that we actively work to create that preventative culture across psychological injury as well. So we have to actively work at creating workplaces that protect employees from harm. And our culture and leadership are critical components of that. The Australian Human Rights Commission has a guideline for organisations on meeting their positive duty under the Sex Discrimination Act, that positive duty being to prevent and respond to sex discrimination and sex harassment. And it makes it clear that organisations have to take proactive and meaningful steps to eliminate that unlawful conduct as far as possible. Again, not just responding after the fact, but implementing clear policies, providing regular training, ensuring leadership accountability, and making sure that we have those systems in place for feedback, for responding, and for reporting. So culture acts as both a risk and a protective factor. When we have a culture that values that respect, inclusion, accountability, we reduce that likelihood of that misconduct happening, that unsafe work practice happening, and it certainly can help us increase trust, safety, performance across our teams. And as leaders, we set the tone. We set the tone for what behaviours are acceptable and not acceptable. for what behaviours we call out versus what behaviours we don't call out, for which policies we follow versus which ones we maybe think aren't as important and don't take as seriously. So if I go through the sort of 10 steps for how we might be able to, I guess, create those healthy workplace cultures where behaviours are respectfully called out, issues are appropriately managed, as Kirsten's commented a couple of times there. We don't ignore issues because it's a bit uncomfortable for us to have that conversation, or we value that employee in a whole bunch of other areas, so we sort of maybe downplay some behaviour that might actually cause an unsafe workplace for someone else. If we look at those sort of deliberate steps across all of those elements of system, leadership, our daily practices, the first is about organisations setting those clear expectations. Now they will do that. Generally, they'll do that through their whole, policy and procedures framework, certainly around things like discrimination, harassment and bullying. They may have a value statement. They'll certainly communicate it through things like their code of conduct. But it's also important that managers are talking about those expectations. When people read words in a policy, we're all different. We all might read a word in a particular way and it might mean very different things to us. So it's not just enough to have those expectations in a policy. We need to be talking about them. We need to talk about what those behaviours actually look like for us in that workplace culture. The second is making sure that we've embedded all of those legal obligations into our policies and procedures. So that positive duty to eliminate harm, making sure that all of those obligations that we have around managing psychosocial risk through the WHS Act, that compliance with the Fair Work protections to avoid discrimination or unfair treatment. We need to make sure that's not just in our policies around the ones that we specifically call discrimination, harassment and bullying, but in all of our policies, our grievance procedures, our performance management systems, our recruitment and selection, all factor those obligations into their framework. We need to equip and hold leaders accountable. So we definitely need to train our leaders on what these behaviours look like. We need to make sure our leaders are capable to manage for everyday performance, not just manage performance when it goes maybe a little bit pear-shaped or where someone's not meeting expectations. How do we have those everyday conversations around performance? And we need to make sure our leaders are comfortable to do that. We need to make sure that we do address poor leadership behaviour. As Kirsten says, occasionally the next person in line just happens to get the leadership role. They're the best technical expert that we have in the organisation. They've been with us for a long time. Tag, they're it. Suddenly they're a manager. They might not necessarily have had any training on being a manager. Their role model for managing was somebody that, they worked with a long time ago that had very different, came up in a very different culture of workplace expectations, leader expectations. So we need to make sure that when we are putting our managers into leadership roles, that they do have that capability and that we hold them to that capability. That might be making sure that certainly for our manager roles that we do have KPIs around team culture, inclusion, those sorts of things, and address any, as Kirsten says, any sort of early red flags that we might have that a manager might be struggling in delivering that leadership accountability. We need to make sure our staff receive regular training, certainly on things like respect, discrimination, bullying, harassment. We need to bring that to life for them. Again, it can't just be words on a page or slides. We need to use real world examples of what that might look like in the workforce. We need to update that regularly because, again, those general community standards that we have around what's acceptable, those reasonable person tests that a lot of our legislation talks about will change over time because what the community sees as reasonable changes over time. So we need to continually update our understanding and our staff's understanding of those definitions. We need to foster psychological safety. For me, a big component is is creating a culture of feedback, encouraging that speaking up without fear of reprisal, promoting constructive feedback within teams. For me, it's very much about shifting the cultural view that we have of uh, feedback as punitive or constructive or those sorts of things, and seeing feedback as a gift. Feedback is a gift that we give someone when we see them operating or behaving in a way that might have negative consequences for them, or negative consequences for someone else in the workplace. If we care about someone, if we care about their progress, we care about them as an individual, and we see them behaving in a way that is potentially harmful for them or harmful for other people, it's a gift to give them that feedback. It's not, we shouldn't avoid it. We need to make sure that we have appropriate systems in place for reporting, that people feel safe to raise issues, that managers are equipped to address issues, not just when they're reported, but when they become aware of them. Again, that's very much part of that positive obligation. And as Kirsten says, that might include having escalation processes in place for managers that aren't comfortable when they become aware of an issue. Where can they go and get support in how to handle an issue? That might be through your people and culture teams. It might be through your EAP. It might be through external resources if you don't have those internally. Act early and consistently. So again, even when they're low-level behaviours in the past that we might have downplayed a bit and said, "Oh, it's just a joke, it's just banter." If we allow those lower-level, what we call those lower-level behaviours to happen, it can create an environment or a culture where some of those more serious behaviours are not, are allowed to happen. If employees see in the workplace that some of those lower-level behaviours are acceptable, they might be reluctant to step forward when something more serious happens because they have the sense that the organisation won't respond appropriately or sees those behaviours as acceptable. We need to empower our bystanders to step up, to call out inappropriate conduct when they see it, to create, again, that culture of the way that we do things around here. If our colleagues feel empowered to pull us aside and say, "Oh, look, I think the way that you spoke to that person, isn't consistent with our policies," or I felt a bit uncomfortable with that, that can have a great impact on setting the tone and that culture. We need to understand our culture. We need to monitor our culture. We need to understand what's going on in our culture. We do that certainly through all those systematic measures that we have in our organisations, our engagement surveys, our turnover statistics, our absenteeism rates, our safety incidences, our grievance numbers, all of those sorts of things. But for me, the biggest tool that we have and the biggest resource that organisations have around that monitoring cultures is that relationship that managers have with their employees. A culture of regular one-on-ones, regular check-ins, feedback is one of the most important ways that we have to monitor that culture and be able to identify early on if something's going off the rails, and we can intervene early to bring it back on track. And then, of course, the most important is leading from the top. So again, employees will they will look to their leaders to say what is the appropriate behaviour. So again, we can't just have the policies and procedures on the shelf. The executive and senior leaders actively have to promote respectful behaviour. They actively have to promote zero tolerance, calling out those behaviours that they see that are inconsistent with the organisational policies and procedures. And that culture and safety are absolutely part of that regular executive agenda, making sure that they keep on top of those sorts of things.
Thank you, Bronwyn. And I hope this 10-step process is useful to our participants who have tuned in today. Also, I did want to apologize for the technical issues we encountered earlier. I mean, it wouldn't really be a successful Zoom meeting without those technical errors, am I right? So, so thank you for all the attendees who commented that the slides weren't showing. I hope it's all cleared out now. Now, I think we've hit you've answered all the questions that I had for you. Let's move on to our Q&A section for today, Kirsten and Bronwyn. I also encourage all participants to drop in your questions. There were a few questions that I did see earlier, but due to these technical issues, I cannot see them anymore. So if you can be kind enough to put those questions again, I'll try my best to pick out a couple of them and ask our experts. So the first question I would like to ask is for Kirsten. Kirsten, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Wonderful. So one of the attendees submitted this in our form, and they asked, what happens if I do end up with an employee taking me to Fair Work? What do I do then?
Okay, that's a really good question, because if you haven't been there before, it's the big unknown, I guess. I would probably start with do not panic. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, you might do everything right, or at least attempt to do everything right, and you still may end up in Fair Work, okay, with a matter. So if you do, or end up in Fair Work, or a colleague does, we end up with that dreaded SEC official email saying that an employee has taken you on in a claim or a general protections claim, for example. Seek professional help. Do not do it on your own. Now, I say that because it is a bit of an art form to know all of the processes around managing a matter like this, and and knowing how to respond and what information you need to respond, and it can be quite daunting, sorry. So when you do get that help, I would make sure you have everything available you could possibly have available to you regarding the matter. So my favourite saying is, and I think I'm repeating myself now, but these cases are won and lost on documentation. And that really is true. I will not go as far as to say that it is the only item that would be looked at by Fair Work, but it is a very, very strong factor. That's how they work through the merit of a claim effectively. So in relation to the matter, you can find professional help in an advocate, and then you make sure you have all of your documentation together. And this might also mean that you could put together a chronology of the events, lists of people who could help attest to the situation. So, for example, if someone was saying that you had unlawfully dismissed them because they'd made a complaint, for example, or because of a protected attribute, it would be important to prove that that was not the reason you dismissed them. So in our world, we call it the operative reason. So you want information, for example, to demonstrate that your operative reason, or in the words of Fair Work case law, or in the reason in the operator's mind at the time of termination, was not because they made a complaint or because of a protected attribute. It was because of bad performance or conduct, for example, that you'd been trying to manage and were not able to change that conduct or performance. Or, for example, demonstration that they'd repeatedly broke policy or refused to adhere to lawful instructions, or because they were intoxicated at work or bullying staff. So this information that supports you in a Fair Work matter, or your response to Fair Work, is to demonstrate by way of contemporaneous file notes, diary entries, calendar meetings, emails, performance, improvement plans, discussions, witnesses, statutory declarations, examples of work output, and so on. And it is obviously really important to keep record of those types of things and ensure that the performance processes are run in line with, standard performance management processes and procedures. So, you're demonstrating that you've got this. And it goes back to when we were talking about the case before about having robust performance management systems, and then having, you can see, documentation, getting help. It's, I'm sounding like a broken record, I'm sorry, but it really is the key. It is the core to responding. What I could also say is that there's many excellent materials on the Fair Work Commission website which can assist you in understanding the process. And you might say, oh, that doesn't really apply to me. I think actually understanding the process can take a bit of the scariness out of it, but also help you equip yourself to never get there, so to speak. So that it sometimes helps to just have a view of what occurs in each matter. So the unknown can be a lot scarier, but it also means that you could pick up something that may actually help your advocate if you were in a matter. So I find my clients do want to have they want to feel like they have some control in the process, manage the process, managing that documentation and making sure we have all of that to manage a matter is the way that they can do that. So if you've rung for help and you've started gathering your documentation and your chronological records to assist your advocate, and you've kept the process confidential, ensure you stick to your dates and also have a think about the issue at hand. Listen to the options presented to you by your advocate. What is the real issue here? Is there another solution? Would it be better for your company to try and resolve the issue prior to it reaching Fair Work? Because that is an option. Is there a mutually agreeable outcome that can be reached? Another item I'd say is learn from it. Sometimes these things highlight issues in your organisation. Managers have left bad performance go too far and then ends up being unreasonable management action. Grievance procedures are badly written, or people are poorly documenting performance or terminations. Lack of general knowledge around HR. If this is the case, make sure you implement processes, procedures and training to make sure it doesn't happen again. The bad journey might be the very thing that saves you. As I said at the start, it's not always that you've done anything wrong, and sometimes you still end up there, but utilise professionals, gain impartial and independent advice. A unique perspective and an objective way forward is really key. Allow them to shoulder the problem so your main business can keep going and be part of the business as usual. I would also ensure that people have access to an employee assistance program along the way, who are the people that are caught up in matters such as this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Bronwyn, the next question here, I think you would be the right person to answer this. So the attendee is asking, how do I maintain expectations and accountability of reports while still maintaining a friendly relationship? I think this is a common one we get.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I really like this question, and thank you to whoever submitted that. This is a common concern that comes up, particularly for new managers. We run a new manager training called Stepping Up, and it's a common concern that people have, particularly when they might be stepping into their first manager role. They might be stepping up from colleagues that they're friendly with. How can I set those expectations around behaviour? How can I hold people accountable, but still, to be, as you say, friendly there? So the first element for me around this, it's important for people to understand their own leadership style. As I said before, sometimes we step into that leadership role. It's our first go at it. We're never very good at things when we first try them out. No one's born an expert in anything. So, we might make mistakes, but being reflective, starting to understand your own leadership style is important. That developing our emotional intelligence, so understanding our own emotional triggers and how we might respond to situations, understanding the impact that our behaviour might have on others is really important. The second, which I've already touched on, is that it's important for us to reframe feedback as not just corrective or performance-based, but a gift. We give people feedback because we genuinely care that they're behaving in a way that might have consequences for them. And the third is to approach conversations with curiosity. I think Kirsten's touched on this with a couple of the comments that she's made around how we approach this, but it's really a critical component of our leadership that we approach a situation, an issue that we're having with a staff member with curiosity, not with judgment, so that we see the conversation as an opportunity to understand why someone is behaving the way that they do. So keeping that in mind, those three elements, that we understand our own leadership style and the impact that we have on others, that we see feedback as a gift, and we approach conversations with curiosity. So how do we do that and maintain those friendly relations? The first is to set those clear mutual expectations early on with everyone in the team. So as we said, that's a critical component of management, but we have to be clear around what our expectations are around performance, behaviour, communication, all of those sorts of things. The second is be consistently fair not favorable. So treat everybody with respect, regardless of how you close up personally. Look, the reality is we will get on with some people in our teams better than others. But if we make sure that we are treating everybody consistently, regardless of that closeness personally or not, then that can avoid that perception of preferential treatment. And that preferential treatment can certainly damage team trust, but it's also a common element that we see in bullying claims around exclusion. And so it's important that we are treating everybody favourably. As I said a couple of times, see feedback as a gift, deliver it in a way that is both honest and respectful. I'm sharing this with you because I care about your progress. I'm sharing this with you because I think that other people, it's had an impact on other people. Lead with warmth and boundaries. You can be friendly, approachable, and human, but still maintain your role as a leader. You can, check in on how someone's weekend went, how their dog, cat, child is, whether their football team won or lost, and still be able to give feedback to people when it's needed. You can, have lunch with your team and still set a line in the sand that when we see behaviour that is inconsistent with our policies and procedures, that we call it out. Be transparent about that relationship. If you are close with someone on the team, have the conversation with them around that intent around your management style. I really value our working relationship. I value our friendship, but I just want to make sure that we're both clear that when I step into that role, into that manager role at work, that it's about work and that's not personal. Role model that accountability yourself. Again, vulnerability is a really big component of how good we are as leaders. Make sure that you admit your own mistakes, share with the team, with all of the team, about what you might be doing to improve. And then the last is celebrate wins, but don't avoid hard conversations. So obviously, a friendly, respectful working environment includes things like recognition, appreciation for other people, humour, all of those sorts of things, but certainly not at the cost of someone's personal attributes and not at the cost of avoiding issues. And so, holding people accountable shows respect for the whole team and the organisation. And a quick sort of guiding phrase that I came across that I think is quite good here, and certainly one for me that I love having that, fun sort of working environment with my team. Friendly doesn't mean fuzzy. You can be kind and warm and all of those sorts of things with your team without being unclear or inconsistent or avoiding conflict or avoiding those difficult conversations. So thank you to whoever submitted that question. I think it's a great one. Be clear around that line in the sand and make sure that we call people out when their behaviours step across that line.
Thank you, Bronwyn. We have about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions. So is it okay if you guys can keep your answers brief so we can answer some of the questions that people have submitted? The next one I think is perfect for Kirsten because they are talking about claims and the 2 questions that are quite similar, Kirsten. So I'm going to just pick one of them. The attendee is asking, if a fair work claim is made against a manager, what is the role of the organization in this? Is this an individual issue for the manager to seek legal advice or an organization issue? What are your thoughts, Kirsten?
Okay, so if an individual has gone against, put in a claim against a manager, it is the employer. So provided most of the time it will be the employer who will need to respond. Even if a manager is the named respondent, the employer will be the person that has to respond on behalf of that manager. Now, if during the course of that, the manager has acted so widely outside the scope of their position, or they have worked outside of policy, procedure, lawful instruction, etc., then that might be another matter that needs to be dealt with on the side. But when that manager is engaged in a behaviour that can get you into fair work, then effectively they're acting as an officer of your company, and the employer will be required to respond. Now, as I said, manager does it outside of process or procedure and really acts outside of what the employer wanted. That is probably a disciplinary matter for the manager, but the employer will need to deal with the claim.
Thank you for clarifying that, Kirsten. Bronwyn, this one is a good question for you. One of our attendees has asked, an employee has been taking too many sick leave, a lot of feedback was given, and yet no improvement. What do you recommend that, is like the best thing to do next?
Yeah, so just to address, oh, am I on mute? No, I'm good. I just want to address because I can see that question there. They're saying it impacts operational efficiency. One of the things that we have to keep in mind when we have an employee that has something going on, and it might be for reason of a protected attribute, or a right that they have to sick leave, or it might be that they have a disability, or they have caring responsibilities, and they've come to us asking for a change in hours. One of the concepts that two of the concepts that we have to keep in mind is whether we're directly or indirectly discriminating against someone because of a protected attribute. And the second is reasonable adjustment. And so the person's saying here, well, we've had someone that's asked for a change in hours, but that impacts operational efficiency. So what courts will look at is what they call reasonable adjustment. Could you make a reasonable adjustment for someone that has a protected attribute that basically allows them to participate in the workplace the same as someone that might not be facing that same issue or difficulty? Now, there's no easy answer to say what is reasonable and what's not reasonable. Some of the things that courts will look at will be, does that reasonable adjustment impact on other people? Does it cost a lot or a little to implement? Does it have an impact on things like profitability for the organisation? If it's quite an easy reasonable adjustment, you have a flexible work policy, a person can start within a span of hours, a court's probably going to say it would be unreasonable for you not to make that adjustment. If, however, making a reasonable adjustment for one person meant having to show, sort of adjust a existing 24-hour shift cadence, and that had an impact on 30 other staff, then a court would probably say in that instance that change might not be reasonable. But we need to, as an organisation, as a manager, really consider, can we make an adjustment that would allow that person to, to participate in the workplace, and to make sure that we aren't indirectly discriminating against them on the basis of having a protected attribute.
Thank you, Bronwyn. We do have one more question around what training programs we run. And they did talk about, do we offer performance management courses, dispute resolution? And I can speak for you if that's okay, Bronwyn. Bronwyn does run our anti-discrimination, bullying, and harassment training, both in-house and in our public training offering space. She's also one of our lead facilitators for Stepping Up program for emerging leaders and managing performance in the workplace. So if anyone is keen to attend one of these sessions and meet Bronwyn in person, because she's lovely, you can always visit our website and inquire with our team, and they'll get in touch with you and guide you on the next steps. We do have dispute resolution courses as well, both on how to manage workplace investigations and how to resolve workplace conflict, through mediation. So please feel free to visit our website. I'll drop a link in the chat, and you can see what other courses we offer as well. That brings us to an end of today's session. As you can see, our team just popped in our next webinar's details. We will have Bronwyn joining us for the second part of this webinar with one of our other senior facilitators, Alona. Kirsten will be back for the third part. Thank you all for joining us today and for bearing with us while we had those technical issues. We've made it till the very end. As you can see, our next webinar topic in the series will explore managing performance the right way, from expectations to accountability, on the 29th of July. For anyone who wants to give us feedback for today's session, we do appreciate feedback. Please use the link in the chat to share your experience today. Thank you once again, Bronwyn and Kirsten, for joining me. It was great speaking to both of you. A lot of great insights were shared. We will be sending through the recording of the webinar to all the attendees so you can have access to all the case studies, and I will be sharing further reading material so you can read more about the case studies that Kirsten was talking about, and also look into the steps that Bronwyn recommended towards the very end. Thank you once again, Bronwyn and Kirsten. Was there any closing statement from both of you?
No, thank you very much for everyone for listening.
No, and for me, remember, culture is king. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you.